Today, our Take 5 continues with the saints, January 30th, as we take a look at John Chrysostom and celebrate his life. John the Golden Mouth, that's what Chrysostom means. And to say that he is one of the greatest, if not the greatest preachers in the history of the church through its 2,000 years of existence is not hyperbole. He is regarded as someone through his contemporaries, even those who vehemently opposed him, because sometimes he was a little outspoken as a good preacher, all recognized his gift from his background as a desert monastic to becoming the bishop of that great important city of Constantinople, where his messages and his sermons influenced thousands and thousands of people over the course of his time as bishop. Our scripture to celebrate his feast day is out of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 31 through chapter 13, verse 7. But strive for the greater gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Passage very familiar to many of us. In fact, it actually is the gospel coming up in our readings here on this very Sunday, January the 30th, not the gospel but the New Testament lesson that we will be reading at church on that Sunday morning. It is also a wonderful testament in marriage ceremonies and a wonderful testament on an entirely different angle of those who proclaim the gospel with the fullest intent of loving God faithfully and without regard for one's own self-service in that ministry. John Chrysostom was born in one of the great centers of ancient Christianity in Antioch, the same Antioch that mentioned a few days ago, where Paul and Barnabas and Silas and their companions went to deliver the message of welcoming Gentiles into the faith. So people like John Chrysostom, a couple of centuries later, probably would not have become Christians without that warm pastoral response. It's ironic because it was that warm pastoral response of those early church founders 300 years ago that when John Chrysostom was born in 354, it was the pastoral care of preaching that became one of the great hallmarks of his style and why he was so popular with the masses. But his route to become a bishop was, like most bishops, not one where he was striving for that office. At a very early age, he went out into the desert during the height of the desert monastic movement. He spent 6 years out in the desert, returned to Antioch, ultimately to be ordained as a presbyter, what was now we call a priest in our church. And in the year 397, he was made bishop of Constantinople, and people literally flocked to hear him preach every time he would preach at one of the churches in his see. He was also known to be someone who could be rather blunt. It was reputed that he called the Empress Eudoxia, at the time a Jezebel. He was known to criticize the emperor and all of the nobility with neglecting the needs of the people. So he was not universally popular, that even some in the nobility recognized the fact that John had a great gift. And perhaps beyond his recognition of preaching and recognizing God was taking care of the people he preached to and trying to communicate that through his sermons, one of his great messages through his sermons was always in recognizing that what we do in the church is very intimately connected with the liturgy of what is going on around the heavenly throne. He often preached on Revelation. He preached on those symbols of heaven in which there were the angels and the saints of God and those at that time who had been recently martyred, who were standing around the throne praising God, and his sermons were often invitations to encourage people to join in that same throne, that just because a priest says something, it means very little, but the priest is speaking and inviting people to become part of that wider worshiping community. He is known to say about preaching that if a priest had no talent for preaching the word, the souls of those in his charge, quote, would fare no better than ships tossed in the storm. But he was deeply reverential in his practice of the Eucharist and of his understanding of the church as being a healing agent for the needs of his people. John Chrysostom wrote a number of sermons. One of his most significant treatises was called 6 Books on the Priesthood, which essentially was the go-to manual of the 4th and 5th centuries, of the late 4th and into the 5th century, for how priests should exercise their office and what was important. You can go online and look up some of John Chrysostom's sermons, and while, of course, reading them is a far different cry than hearing them spoken, just as it is with listening to a sermon today versus reading one, I invite you to read them, not just to get a sense of his wondrous and rich understanding of God, but to see the care and love that he exercised through the gift of his golden mouth to the people in his charge. So, thank you for joining me. Come with me tomorrow again. Tomorrow's saint will be John Bosco. Look forward to seeing you then. Take care.